I'm John Sicotte, executive editor of the Brewer magazine. Welcome to another edition of the Brewer magazine podcast. Don't forget that you can always like and subscribe on YouTube or Spotify. And of course, you can always check out the latest content that we have for you at brewermag.com. Well, even if you aren't canning for a bunch of distribution territories, the quality of your canned product, whether it's for to-go sales out of your tap room or selling to local accounts and doing it via self-distribution, it's just as important to have that quality. Well, Baxter Brewing's Merrit Waldron, who has more than a decade of experience in quality control and professional brewing, he's the author of the book Quality Labs for Small Brewers, Building a Foundation for Great Beer. And he spoke with me a few years back for a series of articles that ran on brewermag.com. And I thought it was important to be able to share all those tips in this podcast and seeing how a canning day should be working out for you. Check it out. Well, and I think that's really a lot of this is obviously getting ready for canning day is just being the best ready quality and clean that you need at the part. And I'm looking at your setup, and SOPs are so important. What are kind of the key things that you think a lot of people might forget if they're developing an SOP for canning day?
Yeah. So, SOPs are kind of, that step-by-step instructions. I think some people forget about the safety aspect of that, just remembering that we are working with high pressures. Mm-hmm. That's something that I've harped on with actually Jamie from Ninkasi. We just did an SOP talk, and that's something that we were kind of harping on. I think also people put in too much kind of anecdotal information. Listen for this sound. What does that really mean? It should be kind of measured values. So instead of a game of telephone, if it's a high pitched sound or low pitched sound, it probably shouldn't be in an SOP, but there should be more measured values. So I call those quality control points, kind of pointing those out and kind of making sure they're accessible for everybody.
Gotcha. Just talk about, have you worked on a mobile canning line versus, regular canning line? What are kind of some of the key differences there? Because obviously you're working with someone else that, the equipment side is probably more on them, right? Then It's just you having the liquid ready and the hoses and things like that.
Yeah. So temperature is a big deal for those mobile canning companies. I've only worked with one mobile canning company.
Okay.
So temperature was a big deal for them, and carbonation level was a big deal for them. So making sure that your processes on that end of the spectrum are in line. Again, I'm going to harp on measurement, but you could do with just a Zahmannagel, you can measure that. Even better, get a CO2 meter like a Pentair or Anton Par. That'll give you a better result. Or a more accurate result. I think they're totally worth it, even if you are using a mobile canner, because you can get a combined dissolved oxygen meter as well. So if you're working with a mobile canning company, I would ask them what are their quality measures, especially as in dissolved oxygen and short fills. How are they checking for short fills? How often? Because those are two directly related kind of components.
On your canning line, what were kind of some of the things that you guys have tweaked even in this last year that you've been there to improve quality? What have been the big things for you guys that have made your beer better?
Oh, that's a good question too. So purging. So we've tightened up our cleaning processes. So there was a couple different ways that they were cleaning, which were all valid. But just to make it easier and take some of the guesswork out of it and making sure steps weren't missed, essentially we have a CIP procedure and we have a sanitation procedure, and you always CIP before you sanitize, and just making that clear cut. And it's saved us time as well as improving the quality of the beer, I think, because we're setting up the same initial conditions every time. So the line works more reliably. We're running a CL45, so a Cody line, counter pressure filler right now. And just making sure that all those parts inside and out are clean. It's been running a lot better, less sticky stuff around, because that beer sticky just gets stuck everywhere. Mm-hmm. So cleaning is huge. And then purging. So there's kind of two steps in purging. Purging at startup. So we've kind of optimized that using our DO meter. Just kind of trial and error, tracking different ways to purge. Have been really improving our quality, as well as checking, because we have a couple different purge functions on our counter pressure filler. So just kind of finding out where we get the most bang for our buck, because we still have to meet production guidelines or deadlines, I should say. So we still need to be we run about 40 cans per minute. So we need to be kind of close to that range, but we got to figure out how to get our canning line to get the best quality beer at that speed, unless we want to upgrade our canning line or add another shift. But nobody likes working overnight. So,
right.
Especially now. I mean, we've probably shifted to 95% canning now. And we'll produce probably 20,000 barrels this year. It's a lot of beer going through cans.
Right.
We're running at 14 hours of runtime plus three and a half hours of clean / setup time. But I think that's one thing that is really improved, just kind of for us, is scheduling in that. I think I put it in as preventative maintenance and cleaning time, but just like that daily. So instead of running from the very beginning of the shift and rushing to clean after you hit your guidelines, just making sure that you can fit it in and make sure you fit in that cleaning at the end of the day.
Is there tweaking throughout on a canning day for you guys? Are you, how often are you measuring and making sure that you're staying, the whole canning, the whole run is the same?
It'll probably depend on the canning line, but we do hourly checks.
Okay.
So a big concern of ours is seams. So we do hourly seam checks. We have some seam inspection equipment that I'm pretty lucky to be working with, but you could do it with a micrometer and some calipers as well. Gotcha. But seam checks every hour. DO checks have been less frequent now that we've kind of got it dialed in. But if just coming up with a plan, is it every hour or is it only after startups and stops? I prefer to check throughout the day, and I like to put that on the operators, not so much the lab person, because it doesn't make sense for a lab guy to come out and say, your DOs are terrible, change things, because the lab guy is usually not the person. I mean, actually, most craft brewers don't have a lab guy, but whoever, empower whoever's running that canning line to make the change, as long as it's based on evidence.
Gotcha.
From your DO meter. That's one of my kind of thoughts on that.
For each beer style, each beer that you guys have, do you have parameters set for all of them? Is there a standard for all of them? I mean, kind of go over that, just being able to know what you need to and how to adjust and how long it takes to get to those points.
Yeah, so our standards were based a little bit on what our draft accounts could pour here at Baxter. So typically a draft account would be pouring beer at 2.5 volumes. So we set our keg volume CO2 volume standard and our can CO2 volume standard at the same, just so that we don't have any more logistics to add in there. At Rising Tide, we actually had two different values. So we had our keg filling value, which is 2.5 volumes. And then depending on the style, like if we had a Saison and we put that in the can, we wanted it a little bit, more effervescent, we would bump that up to almost, whatever our line can handle, which was pretty much around 2.8. That's about as high as you can go without getting too much foam and getting a bunch of underfills. But we just kind of run the same standards as far as CO2 values at Baxter. The other thing to take in consideration is, is clarity. Some people want some clarity. We filter about 75% of our beer here. Okay. So hitting those clarity standards, you can do that by eye or you can measure it. A lot of craft brewers will do it by eye. Like, how many fingers can you see? Can you see your full finger through it? Actually, Jason at Allagash gave me the J-Bone unit, they called it. So essentially what he did for Allagash White was hold up Allagash White to a computer screen with a certain size font. And depending on how much of the edge on that font he could see would be how many J-Bone units on the different sizes of the font. It's pretty interesting way to kind of It's not the most. I mean, it's more scientific than holding your finger up behind it, but
Sure.
it's not as reliable as it could be. But I just thought it was an interesting tidbit.
Yeah, no, that's pretty cool.
Which I kind of used for our Hefeweizen.
Oh, okay. Well, let's and talk just some of the layout designs, and obviously this is stuff that you walked into, so it's not like you were helping design the layout. But if someone is designing a layout and putting their canning line, in a certain area, does it, how do you improve the flow to make sure that the beer is staying cold, through the process and not having to get stuck somewhere where it can warm up? I mean, how do you? What's the best layout aspects and for plumbing if you're putting together a canning line?
Oh yeah, as close to the bright tank as you can. The less line you have between the bright and your canning line, or less hose. Sorry, I do that downstairs too. I call hoses line as well as the canning line a line, which can get confusing. But the less hose you could have in between, the better. And the more, if you have trench drains nearby, that's even better for cleaning. Just making sure that it's easy to clean, because the harder it is to clean, the less likely people are to do it. But making that cleanup easier. So if you have floor drains, put it, kind of near, so you have access to the drain, but close, so you don't have to, use a squeegee to get it everywhere.
Sure.
To get all that standing water around. But you also need to consider CO2 and air depending on your line. Most lines use both CO2 and air drops, making sure that you have enough supplied air and CO2. Those are usually pretty easy to run in a brewery. Pretty small pipe, and a lot of people just use flex hose for CO2. Oh no, yeah, just making sure that you have access, that and that it doesn't block your operators trying to run the line or pack off. So consider that too, kind of the ergonomics of it, because if you have to keep stepping over hose, it sucks. Adds more trip hazards, which could be a safety issue. And then it's just long, tedious work. So making the canning line as comfortable to work as you can. So it's not always perfect. I know actually we do have to step over a line, but other than that, we try to be as comfortable as we can behind that line, because we're standing there long hours. Like I said, we're running at 14 plus hours a day, 2 shifts. So,
and I'm looking at when it comes to palletizing or the packaging. Are you guys still manual? Do you have a depalletizer, a palletizer? What are you guys doing on those ends?
Yeah, we're lucky. We have a decal that is matched with our line, so it's a Cody decal. Back in the day, they used Wild Goose decal while running a cask line. Actually, they ran twin cask lines at Baxter. At Rising Tide, we used a Ska decal, and we actually also started with a shaker table, which is the worst. Just spring for the decal; it'll save your life. Not everybody has that luxury, but
right.
It's definitely an investment well worth it for everybody's sanity.
Yeah.
Even when it's not working that well, it's better than the alternative. As far as packing out, we still do it manually. We do 6-packs and we do 12-packs, as well as 12-pack variety packs, which is a whole other ball game.
Yeah.
But yeah, just putting the whatever package it is in the cases and then stacking by hand. We have this, I don't know exactly what it's called, but I know everybody is super stoked about it. It's essentially a spring system, so that it keeps the pallet level kind of waist high for people, which is nice. I'm not sure, you could probably find one on like Uline or McMaster Car or somewhere where they have kind of manufacturing equipment, but that's good on people's backs. That might be a pretty minimal investment, and you could drag it around, or you could put it under a fork truck. But you need a fork truck to work it. To get the pallet off the spring, you need a fork truck. So that's kind of one prerequisite. Other than that, we're packing it as neatly as we can, tightly packed, whatever your stacking pattern is. And that's kind of a safety issue for the warehouse, if you have a warehouse. But moving that beer around becomes dangerous if you don't pack nicely and then wrap tightly.
Sure.
Saran or whatever you decide to wrap with.
What are some of that support equipment on canning day that needs to be ready?
Oh, so kind of what I mean by that is making sure you're follow your line from where the cans get fed in all the way down.
Mm-hmm.
So you probably have some kind of date code equipment, or sometimes people do that at the end of the line, but we date every can. So making sure that that's up and running with the correct date, with the correct batch identifier. And we essentially go through the startup of the whole day. I should probably just start at the beginning.
Okay.
First, it'll be the first thing on our list is get your SOP done for your sanitizing. So while they're running that sanitizer CIP cycle, they're going to start going down the line, turning on the decal, making sure day coder is working, turning on the conveyors, making sure that there's air and CO2 going to the line, making sure that the line's powered up. I mean, some of it's pretty obvious, getting the conveyors going, checking the production orders. So we have essentially a sheet, an Excel spreadsheet that tells us what we're packing that day. So checking the production order and then turning on the correct equipment to support that. If we're doing 16 ounces, we're going to get our labeler ready. If we're doing 12-ounce 6-pack, we're going to get our ringer ready or our pack tech ready. And then if we're running 12-pack, we'll get our automatic carton maker. So essentially our box maker ready. Because nothing's worse than, getting the line started. Essentially we stagger our shifts. So we have a 5:30 person that comes in. They do the sanitizing on the line, and then they start going through the checklist. So when the 6 a.m. person comes in, maybe one or two things to have to do on the checklist, and then they can fire up the line and go. And nothing worse than firing up the line, and then all of a sudden you get a backup, and your 6-pack ringer wasn't on and not set up, so you have to shut down the line, go back, and they got to start all over again.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of things that are in the startup checklist. So kind of essentially following your cans all the way through the filler, making sure that we remember to sanitize before we go.
Gotcha.
And then kind of the opposite, shutting everything down would be our closing checklist, and then kind of cleaning the trouble areas and making sure you're cleaning the outside of the line as well as CIPing the inside of the line, and making sure everything's in good order to be put away, taking all the extra packaging out of the material and getting that ready to send back to the warehouse or in storage, things like that. But mostly cleaning, scrubbing the floor, cleaning the equipment you just used, and then tidying up and actually getting set up for the next day is a huge one that's really helped us. That's something I added. So instead of adding, if we know we're packaging our lager the next day, we could switch out our IPA cans and put our lager cans in. So making sure that the decal is ready. So all I have to do is kind of set up and go. So essentially a lot of our processes is how do I set this up for the next guy to make the next guy successful? Because in turn, that's going to make the end of the night successful. So if you kind of have that mentality, I think that's something that I've been implementing pretty well over the past couple months. Well, especially since we've had people come back from COVID,
Sure.
Kind of having a switch like that, making sure you set up your next guy.
Yeah.
Or gal for that matter.
Right. When it comes to training on this, I mean, how have you implemented it to get someone up to steam and ready to be able to know this and at least not have to continually look over at a checklist for them so that it's in their head and quickly get through that?
Yeah, the checklists and the SOPs are definitely mostly training aids for me, as well as reference. This is something actually in that SOP talk that I referenced that we talk about a lot. But training's huge. It's, you kind of need someone to be aware of what they're doing and understand what they're doing, not just going through the motions to have a successful canning day. Because as soon as something goes wrong, they can't fix it because they don't understand how it's working in the first place. Mm-hmm. So I essentially write the SOP, or I work through the SOP with someone that's, kind of the designated expert. So if that's, our packaging lead person, we're like, all right, well, how do you clean the line? And they show me how to clean the line. I kind of just write down in words what they're doing. And then writing down all the metrics that they would have to, 15 minutes here or this temperature. So making sure that that's available for people. And then essentially when we're training, the first part, there's 3 parts of training. There's the trainer showing the trainee what they're doing. Then the trainer shadows the trainee. And then at the end, the trainee has to train the trainer. So that's how we kind of run it. And we don't really have a timeline for that. Some tasks are harder than others.
Sure.
And then usually when you're first starting in the brewery, there's so many new things for people. So essentially we'll show them once or twice. And then hopefully if we have, if someone's pretty quick, they could pick it up in the next week. And then by the end of their second or third week, they can train the trainer. And when I say train the trainer, they can have the SOP in hand, but they have to understand why they're doing each step. So it's a good crutch for them to lean on. And if you train with the SOP, they're more likely to use it when they don't know something. They're like, oh, wait, that's written down. So making sure we have that in hand while we're training, I've had huge success with, both at Baxter and Rising Tide for that matter.
Don't forget, you can always check on brewermag.com. You can also see us on YouTube and listen to us on Spotify. And don't forget daily updates on Facebook, Instagram, and X. I'm Executive Editor John Sicotte for brewermagazine.com.